Hello. Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here. Super awesome. Cool. Well, if you want, you can start asking your questions, but basically, I was gonna first talk about how I got into flexibility, um, and why I think it's so important. Um, and for any of you who know me and like know my training, that I've been doing mobility stuff for a really long time. I would say probably like 7, 8 years, because it was very obvious that I moved like a robot. So when I was a tennis player, when people would watch me, they're like, "Wow, Mercedes, you kind of look super stiff when you're playing tennis." Which tennis shouldn't be a stiff sport, because it is all about flow and moving your limbs with momentum. And so like this kind of stuck with me. It was kind of like something in my mind that, oh, maybe I'm just like a really stiff person. Um, Maybe this isn't really something that I can train to be graceful. Um, but it wasn't actually until I started climbing that I started to see a shift in how my body was moving. And I think because climbing asks for so much more flexibility. With tennis, there are certain moves, like definitely the splits is like really important, and I could like do the side split like fairly easily, but anything else, that was like a major struggle. So in climbing, that's really when I got introduced to like a lot of like these very strange positions. And I noticed, I'm like, oh, I'm actually getting better at these movements. Like maybe I could help it along. So that's when I got into mobility training. But a lot of my mobility training was not focused on flexibility. It was more like, let's get into the joint, let's move the joint around. Um, and I definitely saw improvement in my mobility. And so when I say mobility training, it's like a lot of dynamic movements, like using a lacrosse ball, joint mobilizations, some stretching stuff, but it was like maybe a couple seconds in and out of a certain position. Like I definitely noticed an increase in my mobility and also gracefulness for sure. Like a lot of the spine work that I've been working on the past few years with the folks at who work with Ido Portal, they really work on like the spine movements, and I think that has really helped. But I still never did flexibility. I never just like held a stretch to see what was going to happen. And it wasn't until about last year that I really started focusing on this and started integrating it, like supersetting it with my big strength moves. So I would do like a split squat, and then I would go and do a couch stretch. And then all of a sudden, my split squat, I could go so much deeper with my movement, even though I like had relatively heavy weight on my back doing the split squat. So it was like, there is something definitely to this, and I could see a huge difference in how my hips moved. And it was more that I was moving with ease. And it wasn't as difficult to move my legs around while I was climbing. So that's basically like what kind of like turned the light bulb on for me, that, okay, flexibility for a really long time in the industry that I was participating in, which is like mostly strength and conditioning, is that flexibility training was kind of like not really talked about, not really like emphasized. It was like, yeah, stretching is good. You should probably have good flexibility, but we're not really going to talk about it because you could probably get flexible just doing all of your heavy lifting. So it wasn't working for me really. Like I tried progressive loaded stretching, which is like you add a lot of weight to your movement. And I ended up getting tendonitis. And I've talked to a couple other people who have had the same outcomes. And not everyone responds that way. Some people have seen huge gains in loaded progressive stretching. And so now I do loaded progressive stretching, but I have had to build a base of a lot of static stretching to begin with, so that my muscles and my nervous system got used to these end ranges. So that was kind of the turning point for me. I'm like, okay, these static stretches are starting to change my body like nothing has ever previously. So that's why I've like really gotten into this now. I've been dedicating the last like 8 months to increasing my flexibility in all ranges. So, and I've seen huge results, and that's what stretch mechanic is all about, trying to take a group of people from kind of like the beginning and then taking them to the end of like hopefully some loaded progressive stretching. Not everyone will respond the same way. And so like this mini program that I just came out with today is a little bit of that kind of like beginning phases of like how do you train your body to relax and enter into these new ranges. And you know, I've done it in a way so that you can have little routines that you can just plug in into your already like current training schedule. Stretch mechanic, you know, they're a dedicated group of people who are going to be seeing huge results. The two programs are slightly different in how they're programmed and arranged. But this one will definitely be a really good introduction to flexibility if you're interested in like dabbling in the flexibility realm. And the thing is, like with flexibility training, yes, it's still working your muscles. So like you can't always do flexibility training. It's just going to add more volume onto what you're already doing. So you do need to focus on taking good rest days, not overdoing it. So yeah, so I think this new flexibility program will be great if you're like really like you're curious about flexibility training, what it can do for you. You'll see changes 100%. Like I can guarantee that. So yeah, so that's why I'm like super, super passionate about it. I've just seen huge changes in my body and I continue to see changes. I'm still working on it and I'll probably work on it for another 6 months or so until I get to the ranges that I want. So yeah. I did get some really good questions before the live. One question that I thought was actually quite interesting is which areas of flexibility could be detrimental to climbers if trained too much. I I don't know if there's actually like real like if you can do it too much. I think you could probably get to the point where you overtrain for one, like you could probably get hurt by overdoing it, so that is detrimental. You don't want to push your joints to hyper flexibility. That's not the goal at all. It's mostly like we have our joints can express a certain range of motion, and how much of that range are you actually using? And so like that's what I would say. If you're trying to push past that, that's going to be detrimental. The other part of it is like if you only focus on one joint and one range, let's say the side split, that you want to be able to stem really well, and if that's the only range that you're working on for months and months and months, I would say that that is detrimental because now you're ignoring the rest of the planes of motion in your joint. So that is an interesting question, and I'm not sure that I can really answer it because it really just depends on like who you are, what you want to be doing. So I honestly don't think that there's any specific exercise that are detrimental or like flexibility that is detrimental to climbers because most of us are, I don't know, pretty tight in certain areas, especially like the back bridge and being able to bring the arm, you know, close to in line with your ears. You know, that would be great to see for most climbers. So another question that I got, and this one is kind of a trick question, it's interesting, is how would I approach flexibility in terms of training the nerve tension versus the muscle fascia? And so when I think about muscle structure and movement, I guess like to me the first limiter is normally the nerve. So it's the stretch reflex. So we get to a certain point and the stretch reflex turns on and we're inhibited to get to a certain range. So I'm going to say that nerve tension is going to be the first thing to target. And so how you override the stretch reflex is by adding contractions to your end ranges, and not to push past that end range. So you start to feel a stretch, you say, okay, I'm right there, I'm going to hold it, and you add a contraction. And so by holding these long duration contractions, we'll actually override the stretch reflex. So the first part will be nerve tension, and then you clear that. And then the second part will be laying down new tissue. And so that's where you start to change the fascia. And it, you know, like last time I talked about like lengthening, like the actual, like your tissues don't necessarily go long and then they stay long. You know, there's plasticity in our tissue. So the tissue does have to adapt to that new range, and that could be by adding more sarcomeres in length, so your tissues may eventually get longer. I think that is still being researched, whether we can actually add segments of sarcomeres in a lengthening direction. But it is, the longer that you spend in those ranges, the more tissue that you're going to lay down. Obviously, there is a tipping point of like, okay, what is too much? For static stretches, the research shows that it's about 1.5 to 2 minutes. But there is some like nervous system benefit of holding stretches for longer. You can really increase parasympathetic nervous tone by holding stretches longer. But if you're looking for mostly like performance gains, then 90 seconds to 2 minutes is good enough. And if you're working with smaller muscles like the neck and shoulders, wrists, ankles, you can actually do less time. It's about 60 seconds to 90 seconds. So that would be my answer to like, how do you approach nerve tension versus the fascia? The fascia will happen if you're holding positions long enough and that you're giving it enough frequency to adapt. Okay, so the first barricade is the nerve tension. You have to get to that end range, hold the long duration, and then continue on. Okay, so that was a really, really great question. Another question that I got was, what do I consider optimal flexibility? This is really hard for me to answer. Like, I don't think I can actually answer it because each person is gonna find their own optimal range. Like, if you know, like, oh, I feel really tight and awkward in this position, then maybe it's time to start addressing it. If you know that you can't get a certain foothold because it's like out of your reach because you don't have flexibility, then it's time to start addressing it. Like, I'm not going to tell you that you have to be at a certain range. Like, I know for myself, and I did post about some optimal ranges for side splits, front split, and back bridge, because, you know, like, I think those are some places to first like think about, like, oh, like, what is my range right now compared to these numbers? And if you're not close to those, that's okay. You really just have to ask yourself first, like, do you need that range? And I would say for myself, yes. By comparing myself to other athletes who, like, I watch a lot of female professional athletes who look very easy when they climb, like they're very graceful, and they can move in like a lot of degrees of motion. To me, I'm like, that's what I want, so that's what I'm going to work toward. So I can't answer that for everybody, but if you know that you want to work a certain range, why don't you try it? You should experiment, because right now the research does not really, you know, there's not a lot of climbing specific research for flexibility. So practitioners like us are going to have to figure this out first, and then their, you know, research will follow. So yeah, experiment, you know, do some flexibility training, see how, like, if you can fit some of these static stretches into your strength training, and then slowly progress into more like heavier based movements. You know, that's what's going to increase your flexibility. So those are really, really great questions. I had someone ask, tell us more about parasympathetic tone. Yeah, so I would say in general, when we're, you know, when we're moving around, especially when we're working out, we are normally in a heightened state. So potentially our adrenaline, there's more adrenaline in our body, especially when we're climbing. So we're in more of this like sympathetic nervous system tone where we're kind of like, okay, we're ready for anything. What that means is that we have more cortisol pulsing through our veins. And, you know, especially in the last few weeks, we've had a lot of stress. And so that would be like the place. It's good if we're trying to fight and flee from something, but in general, we want to be working in a parasympathetic nervous system tone. So that means that we're relaxed, we're digesting, you know, the body is focused on repairing. And so they have seen, like, research has shown that by stretching, like static stretching, like and yoga, like things that are more internally focused, can increase parasympathetic tone. And so that just means that we're more relaxed. And when we go into training sessions, you can actually do certain breathing exercises to bring down your sympathetic tone and increase parasympathetic tone before you work out. Because you don't want to be working out in an adrenaline state. You want, for optimal repair and recovery, like you'll be able to train more often and probably feel more recovered if you're training in more of a parasympathetic state. So I hope that answers your question. You're welcome to ask again if I didn't clarify. But yeah, I definitely feel like especially the static, the long hold, the long durations really do help in increasing parasympathetic tone. So that just means, I feel so much more relaxed when I do that. Okay, so some other things I did want to talk about were like isometrics. So with flexibility training, this is basically what the mechanism that we're using is isometrics. There is a certain point where you can overdo isometrics, where not overdo it. I'm gonna retract that. Where isometrics don't really. There is a plateau that you'll hit with isometrics. But for the most part in flexibility training, because we're hitting these end ranges, isometrics are going to be the safest way to increase strength at those end ranges. And so that's why isometrics are so important. And I actually think that by adding in these isometric contractions, you're understanding more about the space that you're creating in that joint. And you're kind of re-educating your system by just like increasing tension at that end range. So I think in terms of like re-educating your body on how to move and how to feel tension in your body, I think it's actually a really nice method to use. And there's so much research on isometrics and its benefits, and it's not just the range that you're training. So let's say I get into my end range right here, and if I'm like having some sort of like massive contraction here, I'm actually increasing strength, like it's 15 degrees on either side of that isometric contraction or joint angle. So, I think there's some really great benefits of isometric training, and it's also not as demanding on the system. You're going to be sore, but it's not like eccentrics where there's a lot of muscle damage. Oh, this is a good question. Does training in a parasympathetic tone give you better results in general? I don't know if I can say yes to that, because I don't know. But when I think about training in more of a parasympathetic tone, I'm probably going to be able to last longer and push harder in my sessions if I'm not constantly stressed in my body. All of the energy is just going to the task at hand rather than everything else going on in my body. So when I think of it that way, I would say, yeah, probably it's probably going to be better for you in general. You're probably going to get stronger, and you're going to recover faster. But I don't know enough about that, and that's actually a really good one for me to look into. So great question. Thank you. Okay, so in my, I did want to talk about positions and like hitting certain muscles. So like in yoga, like the one thing that I've gotten a lot of questions about recently in my stretch mechanic course too, it's like, I'm in this position, is this position right? And with flexibility training, it's actually not about the position. It's actually more about the stretching the right muscle. So we're actually we're targeting certain muscles, but not the position. So I would say like flexibility training and yoga have they're basically two different worlds. Like yoga is very focused on positioning and flow and moving in and out of certain positions and creating kind of like this internal mindset. Whereas like flexibility training is all about positions, joint angle, actually increasing ranges. So that's I would say that's how we we separate the two. And I'm not going to say that one is better than the other, but flexibility training is going to target certain positions more so than yoga. Okay, so if you're thinking about increasing flexibility, do flexibility training and focus more on stretching the correct muscle rather than trying to mimic the position as best you can. Okay, so that would be like number one. If you're new to flexibility and you're not sure, like, am I doing this right? Are you, the first thing to ask yourself is, am I stretching the right muscle? Do I feel it in the right place? As opposed to, my position doesn't look quite right, or like it doesn't look like Mercedes's. Okay, so that, I would say that that is a really big distinction. The other thing I wanted to talk about was actually like why I came up with the big three positions for climbers, and that's the side split, the front split, and the back bridge. And honestly, it's because those positions have been trained in so many other athletic training, like pursuits, like gymnastics and dance, you know, modern dance, anything like that. So that's why I chose those, because they have been heavily researched. Like, practitioners have done a lot of work in these positions. So I can find a lot of information on it. So in terms of like, does it actually bridge over to climbing? For sure. Like, I think 100%, because we have these three positions, we can really work on those positions, and then you're going to see it manifest in your climbing. And those three positions are great because you can continue to see progress. If you keep taking those photos of the side split, front split, back bridge, you're going to see a change every week if you take those photos and you're doing the flexibility training. So that's why I chose those big three. One, it's actually also really motivating to be able to see progress over the weeks that you're doing it. So yeah, that's why I chose those big three, and I think they're you know, they're just really fun. They're fun to work on, and the front split works on the hip flexibility in terms of hip extension and hip flexion. So you're going to be working on increasing psoas flexibility, increasing hamstring flexibility, increasing pelvic positioning, which is really, really important. And in my new flexibility program, the Minimalist program, the first like a little routine will be for the bonuses. Sorry, in the bonuses there is a back fix bonus that goes over controlling pelvic movement. And I think for forward folding, for people who have trouble folding forward, that pelvic movement is going to be number one to target. Like, can you move the pelvis? So I talk a lot about that in the back fix bonus. All right. All right, I have a question here. Feeling pain from non-stretching related injury should make me stop deep stretching that area. Oh, so if you have, sounds like that you're having pain. Okay, so this is how I'm gonna answer this question. So I think the question really is, should I stop stretching a joint or a muscle that I've just recently injured from something unrelated? I would say that if you just hurt yourself, probably don't do flexibility. So don't stretch the area. Like, you don't, like, normally when you injure a tissue, that tissue has already been stretched. So you don't really want to stretch it anymore. So you want to like let it subside. And normally I would say a couple weeks of just like letting it do what it needs to do, and you do your rehab exercises. And then if you're used to flexibility training, if you know how to stretch, I think stretching can actually help, because stretching helps to rebuild those tissues and lay down properly. So eventually, yes, but if you just hurt yourself, I wouldn't do stretching. That would be like my personal opinion on that. It's a good question. All right. Okay, so I think that's all I really wanted to talk about today. Just that, you know, I'm really, really passionate about this because I've seen huge changes in my clients and in myself, and it is something that the climbing industry just hasn't talked about yet. And I'm actually really excited to be pioneering the way for flexibility training. And, you know, like, as time goes on, I'm going to get better at giving you all the best information. But right now I have like, it's been years of research that I've taken from other people and adapted it to climbing. And so you can get, so if you weren't able to get into my stretch mechanic course, this minimalist program is going to be the next best thing. Yes, it's self-guided. I try to give you as much information as possible in, it's almost like an ebook, but it goes through a lot of information so that you can make the right decisions for yourself when it's time to go into your flexibility program or training. I also give you 5 different mini routines. So if you know you have tight hip flexors, then there's like a couple exercises for you to do a couple times a week. If you know that you've had really horrible ankle issues, like you can't get your knee past your toe, or you have trouble hiking down after a big long day and you're having knee issues, it might be your ankles. So I give you a couple things to do for your ankles. There's also in my bonuses, I have a back fix routine and a shoulder routine. In the actual minimalist program, there is additional shoulder work as well, especially for climbers. And that mini routine is actually probably the most in-depth mini routine that I've included in there. And for the back bridge protocol, there is strengthening as well. So it's not just passive stretching. You are going to also be strengthening these ranges. So you're going to do passive stretching to open up the range, and then you're going to go in and do some strength work so that you can really solidify that end range, and then you're going to end with deep range work. So if you choose to do the routines that focus on side split, front split, and back bridge, that's the protocol. The 5 mini routines are more like I have one joint area that I need to work on, and you can do that. So I've tried to lay it out as easily as possible. You can definitely plug these in to your current training schedule. Yeah, so if y'all have any questions, please just like message me, DM me. I love talking about this stuff over and over. Yeah. Oh, I have a question here. Why is back bridge among the big 3? Yeah, because, so specifically for climbing, that is a really great question. And if you know much about me, I wrote a book back in 2015 now. That was, it was all about the squat, the back bridge, and the push-up. Those are like the 3 strength exercises because it's all body weight. And the back bridge was included in there too. So I've been like trying to focus on back bridge for a really long time for climbers because we lack overhead ability and the ability to extend in the spine. So if you can't do a bridge, it doesn't mean that, oh, you've got horrible overhead ability. Like, I'm not going to say that, but it is a really good snapshot of like, how does your back curve? Because we were definitely made, like our joints are made to extend back, and we never look back like this. It's very rare that we do that in our like normal world because we're no longer like picking fruit or whatever overhead, whatever we used to do when we were hunting and gathering. So I would say like the back bridge is the hardest position to work on. It's going to frustrate a lot of people, but the gains that you get out of it, you're going to notice really big differences in your hips, your abs, and your ability to even just like moving your neck back and forth. And not to mention shoulder flexibility. So the back bridge work is going to help bring your arms back overhead as well. And the routines for the back bridge work on wrist flexibility as well. So like with climbers, because we're always so much in this position is non-existent. So, I try to include a lot of this work as well, because the back bridge, it's going to be a lot of pressing. Yeah. And actually like the bridge press ups, which is going to be part of that program, that is overhead pressing, which is basically the opposite of what we do as climbers. So that's why I hope I answered that. I fully believe that the back bridge is one of the better exercises for the upper body to train. Yeah. Okay. Question. So should we stretch on the same day as we strength train? You can, yes. I think the thing is, like, if your strength training session lasts like an hour and a half and then you have a flexibility program that is also like 45 minutes, like it's mostly the volume of time that you're spending training. That's where I worry for overtraining. So if you decide like, okay, I've got my hangboard workout and I've got my upper body workout and I want to finish with some stretches. So the mini routine, like you could choose one or two and just work on those either at the end, or you can superset like one exercise with a strength exercise. That's also totally okay. And I know that there's a lot of fear around flexibility and performance. And in reality, we're not performing at 100%. And that's where the flexibility training can inhibit us, is if we're trying to go 100% right off, like right out of the gate, flexibility is going to inhibit your performance. Okay, that is for sure been studied. But we are hardly ever training in that range. Like we're normally training in the 75 to 85% range, and flexibility is not going to really affect that. And if anything, it's going to open you up so you can get into better ranges while you're training. So yeah, to answer your question, yes, you can. Just don't spend too much time doing flexibility at the end, because otherwise your sessions are just going to last too long. Okay. So just see like if there's a couple positions that you really need to work on, like if you know that your hip flexibility, like if you want to increase hip extension, so that would be working on your hip flexors, then you can just choose one or two and do that right at the end, or superset it. Okay, cool. Awesome. Well, if there's no other questions, I'll wait just a few seconds here if anyone else has any questions. But otherwise, yeah, I will wrap this up. Yeah, okay, so the bonuses for my minimalist flexibility program end on Friday. Okay, so you'll be able to get on a group Q&A with me. It'll be a small group, and then you'll get the shoulder flexibility routine and the back fix flexibility routine. So yeah, okay. But otherwise, yeah, keep it on, keep on doing it, keep trying flexibility. You have to be the person that tries it. Like I can only say so much about it. And flexibility is easy. It's easy to see because you'll be able to see improvements in just one session. I guarantee it. Okay, so just give it a go. And if you have like pretty good increases in just one session, like pretty good means like that you've even made like half an inch progress. That means that your system is ready. Okay, if you're not seeing progress in one session, your body probably needs a lot more convincing, and maybe you should do more static stretching rather than some of the strength work. Okay, cool. Well, thank you, everybody. I really appreciate y'all. I love this community so much. Yeah, so go ahead and ask me any questions through direct messages if you want. All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye.